I've been dating Cameron for about a year and a half. We met through a mutual friend's game night, one of those awkward social gatherings where everyone's trying too hard to seem fun and spontaneous. We ended up partnering for charades and somehow clicked over our shared love of terrible horror movies, the kind where the budget is clearly $47 and the acting is even worse. We started dating pretty quickly after that, and things were genuinely good at first. Cameron was attentive, funny, always made me laugh. He'd send me random memes during my workday, remember little things I mentioned in passing, plan these sweet low-key dates. But over time, maybe around the 6-month mark, I started noticing these patterns that bothered me in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Little things that individually seemed insignificant but collectively painted a concerning picture. The biggest thing was Cameron's friend group from college. He's completely obsessed with them. His entire social life revolves around these people. There's Brett, who works in finance and never ever stops talking about cryptocurrency and NFTs and whatever new investment scheme he's discovered. Heather works in PR and is dating Brett. She's the type who always looks like she just stepped out of a salon. Then there's Gavin, the startup bro who's constantly pitching his revolutionary app ideas that all sound exactly the same. And Kendall, Gavin's girlfriend, who's an influencer with something like 50K followers and treats everything like potential content. They're all very polished, very put together, very aware of how they're perceived. Everyone has the right job at the right company, wears the right clothes from the right brands, goes to the right restaurants in the right neighborhoods. Their Instagram feeds look like lifestyle magazine spreads, perfectly curated brunch photos, candid shots that are anything but candid, those annoying couple photos where everyone's laughing at something that definitely wasn't that funny. And Cameron desperately wants to fit in with them. Like, desperately. He's a high school teacher, which is a noble profession, but let's be real, the pay is not great. Definitely not keep up with finance bros money, but he tries so hard. I've watched him stress about affording group trips to places like Tulum and the Hamptons, watched him buy clothes he can't really afford because Brett mentioned that's the brand the guys at his firm wear, watched him pretend to be interested in things he clearly doesn't care about just to be part of the conversation. It's exhausting to witness. Like watching someone slowly lose themselves trying to impress people who probably don't even notice the effort. I'm a veterinary technician. I work long, unpredictable hours at a clinic where half my day is spent calming down anxious animals, and the other half is cleaning up various bodily fluids. I come home smelling like dog shampoo on good days, and significantly worse things on bad days. My scrubs are perpetually covered in fur no matter how many times I lint roll them. My idea of a perfect evening is changing into the softest pajamas I own, ordering takeout, and reading a good book while my cat judges me from across the room. I met Cameron's friends a handful of times over the course of our relationship. They were always polite in that way that makes it crystal clear they're just being polite because they have to be. Like when someone asks, "How are you?" but doesn't actually want to know. The conversations were surface level at best. They'd ask about my job, and then their eyes would glaze over when I answered. At one dinner, Heather asked what I did for fun, and when I said reading, she responded with this genuinely confused look and asked if I meant audiobooks, like she couldn't fathom someone actually sitting down with a physical book and turning pages. But the real issue, the thing that should have made me walk away months ago, was how Cameron changed around them. He became this different person, more performative, more concerned with appearances, more focused on projecting an image than actually being himself. And he started making these comments about me, little paper cuts that didn't seem like much individually, but added up to something painful. He'd suggest I not wear certain shirts because they were worn out or didn't look quite right, never mind that they were comfortable, and I liked them. He'd ask if I had to talk about work so much because it was kind of a mood killer at dinner parties. Apparently discussing the dog with an ear infection that I'd spent 3 hours treating wasn't the right kind of conversation for his friends. He mentioned more than once that Brett and Gavin's girlfriends were all really into fitness, and maybe we should try that couple's gym membership he'd seen advertised. Each comment individually seemed harmless, almost helpful even, but together, they painted a picture of someone who wanted me to be different than I was. And then there was the fact that Cameron never really integrated into my life. He never wanted to hang out with my friends. After meeting Sophie, my best friend and coworker, exactly once he declared she was too much and made excuses whenever I suggested we all hang out. When I invited him to my work's holiday party last December, he complained the whole time about how boring it was. My book club? Too pretentious, apparently, even though we mostly just drink wine and gossip. My college friends? He could never remember their names and would scroll through his phone when I told stories about them. It was becoming increasingly clear that our relationship existed on his terms, in his world, with his people. I was expected to mold myself to fit into his life, but he made zero effort to be part of mine. My birthday was last Saturday. I turned 27, not a milestone birthday or anything particularly special, but I'd been dropping hints for weeks about what I wanted. Something low-key. Dinner with my close friends at that Thai place we all love. Maybe karaoke after if people were up for it, because nothing says birthday celebration like drunkenly belting out 90s ballads in a private room. I'd specifically, explicitly, repeatedly told Cameron I didn't want anything big or fancy. I hate being the center of attention. I hate surprise parties. I hate those moments where everyone's looking at you waiting for a reaction. He knew this. We'd talked about it multiple times. Friday night, Cameron told me he had to work late on Saturday, some faculty thing he couldn't get out of, parent-teacher conferences or curriculum planning or something school-related that sounded legitimate. He seemed genuinely apologetic about it, said we'd celebrate on Sunday instead. Maybe go to that new brunch place I'd been wanting to try. I was disappointed, but I understood. Jobs are jobs. Responsibilities are responsibilities. So I made plans with my friends for Saturday evening. I texted the group chat, everyone was available. We made a reservation at the Thai place. I was actually looking forward to it. A chill evening with people who actually knew me and liked me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. Then Saturday afternoon, I'm at work finishing up with an extremely anxious poodle named Cupcake, who did not appreciate having his nails trimmed and made his feelings very clear through constant whining and attempts to escape. I'm covered in dog hair, slightly sweaty, my back hurts from bending over the grooming table, and I get a text from Cameron. The faculty thing got canceled. Did I want to come over to his place around 7? He'd make dinner. I was genuinely excited, like heart flutter excited. The quiet evening with my boyfriend that I'd originally wanted. I immediately texted my friends to cancel. They were understanding about it, told me to have fun, we'd reschedule for next weekend. I finished up my shift with a spring in my step, looking forward to a relaxing night. After work, I went home to my apartment and took a long shower, scrubbing off the poodle smell and the general clinic funk that clings to you after a full day of handling animals. I washed my hair twice, shaved my legs, did the whole routine, changed into something nice but casual, jeans and a soft sweater that Cameron had once said looked good on me. Put on a little makeup, but nothing dramatic. The whole time I'm getting ready, I'm thinking about what movie we might watch, whether he'd actually cook or if we'd just order takeout and pretend he'd planned to cook all along. I drove across town to his apartment, about a 25-minute drive in Saturday evening traffic. The whole way, I'm in a good mood, singing along to the radio, thinking about how nice it would be to just relax with him. Maybe we'd talk about that trip we'd been vaguely planning. Maybe I'd finally tell him that his friend Brett is actually kind of insufferable. Maybe we'd just exist together in comfortable silence. That's what I wanted. Simple, comfortable, us. I got to his building around 7:15, fashionably late, which I knew he'd tease me about because he's weirdly punctual for a teacher. Let myself in with the key he'd given me a few months back during one of those relationship milestone moments that feels significant at the time. I expected to find him in the kitchen attempting to cook, or more likely frantically cleaning up takeout containers to pretend he'd cooked. The apartment was completely dark though, which struck me as odd. All the lights off, curtains drawn. For a second, I wondered if he'd forgotten I was coming, but his car was in his assigned spot in the parking garage. I called out his name. Nothing. Called out again. Louder. Still nothing. Then suddenly the lights flipped on and about 20 people jumped out from behind furniture and around corners yelling, "Surprise!" I literally screamed, like full body startled, hand to chest, heart racing, thought I might actually die for a second there kind of scream. Several people laughed at my reaction. Someone, probably Kendall, was definitely filming. And then I looked around the room and processed who was actually there, and my stomach just dropped like a stone. That excited flutter I'd felt earlier, completely gone, replaced by this cold, sinking dread. It was all Cameron's friends, every single one of them. Brett and Heather were there in the corner by the window, dressed like they were going to some fancy cocktail party at a rooftop bar. Brett in an expensive-looking button-down, Heather in a dress that probably cost more than my rent. Gavin and Kendall near the kitchen, with Kendall already holding her phone up high to get the perfect angle for her Instagram story, capturing my shocked and increasingly horrified expression. A bunch of other people from their college group that I'd met maybe once or twice at various gatherings. Names I couldn't remember, faces I barely recognized. Cameron's cousin Jeremy was there. I'd met him once at Thanksgiving. We'd had a 5-minute conversation about traffic, and we hadn't spoken since. Cameron's co-worker Neil, who'd made an uncomfortable joke about my job at a dinner party 3 months ago. Something about me playing with puppies all day while real people had real jobs. I'd been avoiding him ever since. Cameron's former roommate from college, Brett's brother, Heather's friend from her yoga class, all these peripheral people from Cameron's life. Not a single one of my friends. Not Sophie, who'd been my best friend since vet tech school and who knew me better than anyone. Not my roommate Isabel, who I'd lived with for 3 years and who I told everything to. Not my college friend group, who I still saw regularly. Not Rachel or Mike from work, who I got lunch with every week. Not a single person from my actual life. Not one. Cameron came over beaming, this huge, proud smile on his face like he'd just pulled off the surprise of the century. He hugged me, this performative hug that felt stiff and staged, and wished me happy birthday loud enough for everyone to hear. Told me he knew I'd said I wanted something low-key, but he'd wanted to do something special for me. Make my birthday memorable. Show me how much I meant to him. Everyone was watching us, phones out, waiting for me to be excited and grateful and touched by this grand romantic gesture. Waiting for me to cry happy tears and gush about what an amazing boyfriend I had. I tried to smile, tried to look pleased and surprised in a good way, but I could feel my face doing that thing where it's not quite convincing anyone, where the smile doesn't reach my eyes and my expression is more grimace than genuine happiness. The party was clearly, obviously expensive. There was catering, actual catered food from Harvest and Hearth, this trendy farm-to-table restaurant downtown that I knew charged absolutely absurd amounts for small portions of food on big white plates. Little appetizer stations set up around the apartment with fancy cheeses and charcuterie and those tiny quiches that cost like $5 each. A bartender, an actual professional bartender, was set up in Cameron's small kitchen making making craft cocktails with fresh herbs and elaborate garnishes. The decorations looked professionally done, nothing DIY about them. Balloon arches, string lights, a whole backdrop for photos that looked like something from a wedding. There was a massive cake from Sweetness Bakery, the place that charges $80 for their most basic option and has a 6-week wait list. Cameron must have spent a fortune. Money he definitely didn't have. Money he probably put on a credit card he was already struggling to pay off, all for this party I didn't want, with people I didn't know. He gave me a tour of his own apartment like I hadn't been there 100 times, pointing out all the details he'd planned. The color-coordinated decorations, everything in rose gold and white, because apparently that's trendy. The signature cocktail he'd created and named after me, something with gin and elderflower that I knew I wouldn't like because I hate gin. The carefully curated playlist full of top 40 hits that I'd never choose to listen to. The photo backdrop with props and signs. Everyone was drinking and mingling and laughing, already deep into conversations that I wasn't part of and couldn't join. Heather came over and air-kissed both my cheeks, an affectation I've always hated, and told me how cute the party was, how much effort Cameron had put in, what a lucky girl I was. Like I was supposed to be grateful to him instead of, it being my birthday. Like this was his achievement, not my celebration. Brett came over and clinked his drink against mine. I was apparently holding a cocktail that the bartender had automatically made for me, and said something about Cameron really outdoing himself. Gavin made a comment about relationship goals. Kendall asked if she could take a photo of us for her Instagram, told me to stand here, tilt my head like this, smile bigger. No, not like that. Like you're actually happy. I kept looking for an opportunity to pull Cameron aside and ask him what the hell he was thinking. What part of "I don't want anything big" translated to "throw me a party with 20 of your friends and none of mine"? But he was in full host mode, making sure everyone had drinks, checking on the food, telling the story of how he'd planned everything in secret and coordinated with his friends to keep me from finding out, basking in all the attention and compliments about what a good boyfriend he was, how romantic this gesture was, how lucky I was to have someone so thoughtful. Brett clapped him on the back and announced to anyone listening what a good boyfriend Cameron was. Heather swooned about how she wished Brett would do something like this for her. Gavin asked Cameron for tips on planning surprises, and Cameron ate it all up, this attention and validation from his friends. I felt like I was watching someone else's party, like I was a prop in Cameron's performance of being the perfect boyfriend, like this whole elaborate production wasn't actually about celebrating me, but about him showing off to his friends, proving something to them, getting their approval. None of these people actually knew me. Half of them barely acknowledged me beyond a quick happy birthday, before going back to their own conversations about their own lives, upcoming trips, work drama, mutual friends I'd never met. I was standing in a room full of people at my own birthday party, and I felt completely, utterly alone. I ended up by the food table, picking at mini quiches I didn't really want, and texting Sophie because I needed to talk to someone who actually gave a damn about me, someone who knew me well enough to understand why I was not okay right now. I told her about the party, about how Cameron had invited all his friends but none of mine, about how I was surrounded by people I barely knew at my own birthday celebration, about how wrong this all felt. She immediately offered to come, said she could be there in 20 minutes, would drop everything and rescue me from this nightmare. For a moment, I almost said yes, almost told her to please God get me out of here. But the thought of her showing up to this party where she wouldn't know a single person, where she'd be so obviously out of place among Cameron's polished friend group, where she'd probably get the same judgmental once-over I always got. It felt worse than just enduring this alone. So I told her no, I'd be fine, I'd tough it out, told her we'd meet up tomorrow, and I'd tell her everything. She made me promise to text her if I needed an escape plan. About an hour into this ordeal, Cameron clinked his glass with a knife to get everyone's attention. That crystal clear ringing sound that makes everyone stop talking and turn to look. My stomach dropped. I knew that look on his face, that performer's look, that watch me do something impressive look, that eager anticipation of positive attention. He was about to make a speech, and I wanted to sink through the floor and disappear. The room quieted, all eyes on Cameron. A few phones came up to record what was clearly going to be an important moment. He thanked everyone for coming to celebrate my birthday, for keeping the secret, for making this night special. Everyone cheered and raised their glasses. Then he started talking about our relationship, about how we met at that game night, about our first date watching a terrible horror movie called Shark Tornado or something equally ridiculous, about how he knew pretty quickly that I was special, that I was different from other girls he'd dated. The room was eating it up. People were awing and smiling and looking at me expectantly. I was standing there feeling like I might actually throw up, my face burning, my hands shaking slightly. This was my nightmare, being the center of attention, everyone watching, waiting for me to perform the right emotion. He talked about how much he loved me, how lucky he felt, how I made him want to be a better person. All these things that sounded nice but felt hollow given everything that had happened over the past few months, given how he'd been trying to change me, given that we were currently at a party he'd thrown for himself, not for me. And then he got down on one knee. The room exploded. Gasps. Excited squeals. I heard Kendall's voice go high-pitched with pure delight. Multiple phones came out immediately, everyone wanting to capture this magical moment for their own social media, for their own proof that they'd witnessed something romantic and special. Brett whooped. Heather clutched her chest like she might faint from the romance of it all. Cameron was kneeling there on his living room floor in his his expensive jeans, the ones I knew he'd bought specifically because Brett had mentioned that brand once, and the sweater I'd complimented once 6 months ago and that he now wore constantly. He was holding out a ring box, this small velvet box that he opened with a practiced flourish like he'd rehearsed this moment. The ring was gorgeous, objectively, undeniably gorgeous. Platinum band with a decent-sized diamond that caught the light and sparkled impressively. The kind of ring you show off to friends and coworkers. The kind that photographs well. The kind that probably cost him 3 or 4 months of his teacher salary and that he definitely couldn't afford. The kind of ring that makes a statement. He said he loved me, said he wanted to spend the rest of his life with me, said I made him happier than he'd ever been, said he couldn't imagine his future without me in it, asked me to marry him, asked me to be his wife. Everyone was staring, 20 people, all watching, all waiting for me to cry happy tears and say yes and throw my arms around him and give them the ending they expected to this romantic story. The fairy tale moment, the Instagram-worthy proposal, the feel-good content they could share and like and comment on. I looked at Cameron kneeling there, looked at his hopeful face, his eager smile, his confidence that I would say yes because why wouldn't I? Who says no to a proposal? Who turns down a diamond ring and a promise of forever? I looked at his friends, strangers really, witnessing this moment with their phones out, recording me without permission, turning what should have been private into public content. Looked at the expensive party he'd thrown without asking what I actually wanted. Looked at the elaborate production he'd created to show off to these people. And I thought about all the little comments over the past year and a half. All the times he'd suggested I change something about myself. All the times he'd prioritized his friends over mine. All the ways he'd tried to shape me into someone who fit better into his world, who would impress his friends, who would reflect well on him. I thought about how he'd thrown me a birthday party and hadn't invited a single person I cared about. How he'd made this moment about him, about his gesture, about his performance in front of his audience. I thought about the fact that we'd never once discussed marriage, never talked about timelines or what we wanted from the future, never had a single serious conversation about whether we were on the same page about kids or where we'd live or how we'd handle finances or any of the actual important things. And I said no. The word came out clear and definite. No hesitation, no stammering, just no. The silence was immediate and absolute, like someone had hit a mute button on the entire party. Someone's phone clattered onto the coffee table. The bartender stopped mid-pour. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, loud and fast. Cameron laughed nervously, like surely this was a joke, like surely I was teasing him, building up to the real answer, the yes that was obviously coming. But I wasn't laughing, I wasn't smiling. I was just standing there looking at him with what I imagine was a very serious expression. His face cycled through emotions in rapid succession. Confusion first, like he was trying to process what I'd said, then embarrassment as he realized I meant it, then the beginning of anger, his jaw tightening, his eyes narrowing slightly. He suggested we talk in private, his voice low, urgent, trying to salvage the situation, get me alone, convince me to change my mind away from the audience. But he'd proposed in front of 20 people. He'd made this a public moment, a performance with an audience, a spectacle for his friends to witness and record and share. He'd put me on the spot, counted on peer pressure and public expectation to get the answer he wanted. So I gave him my answer in front of that same audience. I told him no, I wouldn't marry him. And then, because I was apparently having some kind of out-of-body experience where I was saying all the things I'd been thinking for months but never actually voicing, I explained exactly why. I told him he'd thrown me a birthday party and invited none of my friends. Not one. Not a single person from my actual life. Just his friends, his people, his audience. He'd made my birthday about him. I told him he'd planned a proposal without even asking if I wanted to get married, without us ever having a serious conversation about marriage or our future, without checking if we were on the same page about literally anything important. I told him he'd spent our entire relationship trying to make me into someone I wasn't, trying to shape me into someone who would fit better into his world, who would impress his friends, who would be the right kind of girlfriend for the image he wanted to project. I asked him why I would say yes to that, why I would commit to a lifetime with someone who clearly didn't accept me as I was, who needed me to change to be good enough. He tried to defend himself, started to say he'd done all of this for me, this party, this proposal, all of it was because he loved me. But I was past the point of accepting that excuse, past the point of pretending, past the point of being polite and accommodating and small. I told him no. He'd done this for himself, for his friends, for his image. The whole party was for show. The proposal was for show. He'd wanted the Instagram moment, the congratulations, the validation from his friends, everyone telling him what a good boyfriend he was, how romantic he was, how lucky I was. He hadn't thought about what I actually wanted at all, hadn't considered my feelings, my preferences, my boundaries, hadn't bothered to learn who I really was beyond the version of me he'd created in his head. I could feel everyone staring, could feel my face burning with embarrassment and adrenaline and righteous anger, but I also felt this strange clarity, like I was finally being honest after months of swallowing down my real feelings, months of making myself smaller to fit into his life. I told him what wasn't fair was proposing to someone at a party full of strangers when you know they hate being the center of attention. What wasn't fair was planning an engagement without discussing it first, without making sure you're both ready, without treating your partner like an equal participant in your relationship. What wasn't fair was was spending a year and a half trying to change someone instead of just accepting who they are and either loving that person or letting them go. The room was dead silent. You could hear the ambient music that had been playing softly in the background, some pop song about love that felt deeply ironic in that moment. Then I grabbed my purse from wherever I'd set it down, and I walked out. Cameron called after me, his voice pleading now, embarrassed, angry, desperate. But I didn't stop, didn't turn around, didn't look back, just walked out of his apartment, down the stairs. I didn't even wait for the elevator, and across the parking lot to my car. I sat there for a minute with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened, what I'd just done. My phone started buzzing immediately. Cameron calling, texts pouring in, notification after notification. I ignored all of it and just drove home, my mind blank, running on autopilot. Isabel was on the couch when I got there, watching some reality show. She took one look at my face and immediately muted the TV and asked what happened. I told her everything. The surprise party with none of my friends, the proposal in front of everyone, my very public rejection, my speech about everything wrong with our relationship, walking out while everyone watched. By the end, she was staring at me with her mouth open, and then she started laughing. Not mean laughing, proud laughing. She hugged me tight and told me she was so proud of me, that Cameron had been awful to me for months and she'd been hoping I'd dump him, that I'd done the right thing even if it was dramatic as hell. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop replaying the moment, the look on his face, all those people watching, the phones recording, how everyone would think I was a monster. Who says no to a proposal in front of everyone? Who humiliates someone like that in public? What kind of person does that? Isabel reminded me that I was someone being proposed to by the wrong person, for the wrong reasons, at the worst possible time, in the worst possible way. That Cameron had invited his friends to my birthday party, my birthday, and then proposed without ever discussing marriage. That he'd put me on the spot, counted on public pressure to force a yes, used his friends as leverage. That it was manipulative and wrong, and I'd responded with honesty. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Eventually I looked. Cameron's messages were all about how humiliated he was, how everyone had seen me reject him, how his mom was calling him crying. Apparently she'd been watching via video call, which was news to me. How I'd ruined the best night of his life, how he'd spent thousands of dollars on this party and the ring, how I'd embarrassed him in front of everyone who mattered to him. Not once did he say he was sorry. Not once did he ask why I'd said no. Not once did he acknowledge any of my actual concerns. There were texts from numbers I didn't recognize too, probably his friends weighing in on my terrible behavior. I deleted them without reading. But then I saw messages from my actual friends who'd heard through Isabel what happened. They were supportive, even proud. Sophie said it was icon behavior and that Cameron had always been weird to me. My college friend Morgan said she'd never liked him and was glad I'd finally seen the light. Rachel from work said she'd always thought Cameron talked down to me and good for me for standing up for myself. People had apparently noticed things I thought I'd been hiding. The way he'd correct me in conversations. The way he'd speak for me when people asked me direct questions. The way he'd make little comments about my clothes or my job or my interests. They'd all seen it and had been waiting for me to see it too. Sunday morning, I woke up groggy and disoriented, my phone dead because I'd forgotten to plug it in. When I charged it and turned it on, there were 17 missed calls from Cameron and a long email that had come through around 3 a.m. The email was worse than the text somehow. Page after page about how much effort he'd put into the party, how he'd coordinated with his friends for weeks, how expensive the catering was, how much the ring cost, how embarrassed he was in front of his friends and family, how I'd ruined everything, how he couldn't believe I'd done this to him. He wrote about how he'd had a specific plan for the proposal, how he'd practiced what he was going to say, how he'd imagined my reaction, crying happy tears, jumping into his arms, saying yes immediately, how I'd thrown all of that away, how I'd chosen to humiliate him instead of just going along with it and discussing my concerns privately later. Not once did he ask why I said no. Not once did he consider that maybe springing a proposal on someone at a party where they knew nobody was a bad idea. Not once did he seem to care about my feelings at all. The entire email was about him, his embarrassment, his wasted money, his ruined plans. I responded with one line. The fact that you're more upset about being embarrassed than about understanding why I said no tells me I made the right choice. Then I blocked his number, blocked him on all social media, blocked his email, cut off every avenue of communication because I knew myself well enough to know that if he kept messaging me, I might eventually respond, might try to explain further, might get sucked back into defending my decision. Work on Monday was surreal. Cameron had apparently been texting people his version of events all weekend, that I'd embarrassed him at a party he'd spent a fortune on, that I'd rejected him publicly for no reason, completely out of the blue, that I was cruel and heartless and had been planning this humiliation all along, that he'd dodged a bullet. Really? Thank God he found out what kind of person I really was before we got married. But my coworkers had my back. They'd all met Cameron at various work events and parties. They'd seen how he treated me, talking over me, correcting me, making little jokes at my expense. Rachel told me she'd always gotten weird vibes from him. Mike said any guy who proposes without discussing it first is waving a red flag the size of Texas. The story spread beyond just his friend group. People were talking about it. Friends of friends, mutual acquaintances, people who'd been at the party and told their own friends about the dramatic proposal rejection they'd witnessed. Cameron's friends were posting vague things on social media about fake people and knowing someone's true colors and how you never really know who you're dating. Kendall posted some quote about not appreciating real love, with a photo of her and Gavin looking couple perfect. Brett posted something about surrounding yourself with real ones. Heather shared an article about narcissistic tendencies, all of them clearly subtweeting about me without naming me directly. But my friends took me out for an actual birthday dinner that Wednesday. We went to the Thai place I'd wanted to go to in the first place, ate way too much pad Thai and curry, and then went to karaoke where I sang an extremely emotional and off-key version of Since You've Been Gone that got a standing ovation from 3 drunk bachelorettes in the corner. It was exactly what I'd wanted for my birthday in the first place. Low-key, fun, surrounded by people who actually knew and liked me. 2 weeks after the party, I got a message from Heather that I almost deleted without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. She said she'd seen the video that Gavin took of the proposal and had been thinking about it a lot. She'd watched it multiple times. Why, I don't know, and had been reflecting on the whole situation. She said the way Cameron had set everything up wasn't okay, that she'd known it at the time, had felt weird about it when he was planning it, but had gotten caught up in the excitement and the romance of it all. She apologized for how they'd all reacted, for immediately taking Cameron's side, for not considering my perspective. She said I deserved better than that. The message surprised me. I hadn't expected any of Cameron's friends to reach out, let alone to apologize or acknowledge that maybe he'd been in the wrong. It didn't change anything. I wasn't suddenly going to become friends with Heather or anything, but it was validating. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that Cameron really had been out of line, that even his own friends could see it when they took a step back from the situation. I sent back a short response thanking her for reaching out and saying I appreciated the message. A month later, I was settling into my post-Cameron life, and honestly, I felt so much lighter. My apartment felt more like mine. I was sleeping better. No more staying up late waiting for texts. No more waking up anxious about whether I'd said or done something wrong. I'd picked up rock climbing again, something I'd stopped doing while dating Cameron because he wasn't interested and always made me feel bad about going without him. I joined a book club that actually discussed books instead of just drinking wine, though we did plenty of that too. I spent more time with friends, real quality time where I wasn't constantly checking my phone or worrying about getting home to Cameron. I hadn't realized how much energy I'd been spending trying to fit into his life until I stopped trying. How exhausting it had been to constantly monitor myself, edit my words, adjust my behavior. How small I'd been making myself just to avoid his little comments and criticisms.